Treangen from Fruit of the Loom and Ryan Water Teradata. Terry is a VP of Information Management at Fruit of the Loom, and Ryan Waters is the Engagement Director. Please join me in welcoming Terry and Ryan.
Who put that up there? Did you do that? Well, hello, as he said, my name's Terry. I spent most of my career in data warehouse and analytics. The last, like 2.5 years, I did Fruit of the Loom. So, Fruit of the Loom, first thing I'll ask, how many people are aware? I better not ask that, though. I'm just curious. My show of hands. I do have some bling up here to give away, but you only get that if you stick around long enough to ask the question. You come up here and pick something out. So we're going to talk about the data warehouse and what we've done or doing at Fruit of the Loom to actually transform that to make that more of an analytical warehouse. First, a little background on Fruit of the Loom. We are a Berkshire Hathaway company. You can see from the map there, I won't go into details, but we have a pretty worldwide footprint. You see the number of jobs. Here's our brands. Most of you probably have heard of Fruit of the Loom. We also have Spalding, Russell, Vassar. You can read the rest of them, so quite a broad spectrum of brands in the Fruit of the Loom family. Thanks. So jumping right into where we were before we started this transition. We've been on Teradata for about 5 years. We've been implementing Oracle ERP for that amount of time. We got 1 more year to go, so it's been a long journey. It really tells you can get on an ERP system in 2 or 3 years, then don't. And usually it's the vendors that do that, so just caution you there, it's going to take a lot longer than what you think. And you can see on the top there, we're using Teradata Decision Experts to bring in the transactional data into Teradata, which works well for getting orders and invoices and everything else related to transactions. And we're also bringing in point of sale data, etc. And sitting on top of that, we got MicroStrategy, and we got a lot of reports running. We call it operational reporting. That's really what it is. How many orders did I get yesterday? What did I invoice yesterday? What were my shortages? That sort of thing come out. You can see off to the right there, where the real work happens, data is extracted out of Teradata and brought into, it's not really a box, it's a bunch of things, but the data is extracted, then you can see the business knowledge and additional user data is brought together with that data using different tools. There's more than just Excel and Access to actually do the analytics there. So there's a lot of munging of the data, the analytics there. Then we get the corporate reporting that comes out that really is what runs the company. So that's the current or the model as it was. So why didn't we like that? Let's go to the next slide. The concerns we had was the TDE modules were really not integrated and they're transactional. So we bought like 7 of them, so we had a lot of data, but they really didn't talk to each other. So if somebody wanted to see some invoice information with some cost information, it wasn't very easy to do. Or isn't very easy to do using that. And it's also not very analytically friendly. It's not interactive. With this large amount of transactions we've got, reports would run for a long time. So you can't really do analytics if you're waiting for 20 minutes for a report to come back. So a lot of what goes on then was people would subscribe in MicroStrategy to have data delivered to them, where they would then bring it into other, like I said, into Excel or Access to actually utilize it. The other, on the right-hand side there, the gaps to meet the business need is what we're going to really talk about here. What we're doing was a data extract, consolidation, manipulation, and the real problem was there was a limited number of people that was doing these things, so you might have one person that had the knowledge of this process. Only one person in the organization. They would take their computer with them when they're on vacation and get up in the morning and do things, and it really wasn't bad. So that's a big deal. In multiple versions of the truth. You had forecasting with one number and finance with another number and the other with another number. And the output, as I showed you before, was just a report. They really couldn't do analytics on top of that. And we're going to go through some examples here. We have more than this, but I wanted to focus in on 3 of them. Process 1 took 3 to 4 weeks every time it was on-demand request. So you'll learn more about that. The second one, 2 weeks every month. So 2 weeks out of a month, a new month comes around, they would do this for half the month. And the third process took 3 weeks once a quarter. So those are the things that we've automated so far. We'll show you how we did that, and many more to come. Every project's got to have a name. We call this Solomon. We started off with a POC 2 years ago. Didn't know how far it was going to go. I told Brian a year, 14 months ago, we were thinking about whether we could put in to present last time in Anaheim. And I said, here's the deal. We're still going next year. If you're still here, then we'll talk about doing it next year. And guess what? We're here. So that's what it tells you about what we've been able to get done. So without further ado, I'll jump into Ryan that'll walk you through the technical aspect of this and how we pull this off. And we still are, by the way. We've got actually Ryan committed to at least the end of next year. So I'll let you go down.
All right. Can everyone hear me? It sounds like it. So Terry talks about the fact of going from operational reporting to corporate reporting and all the trouble they had, right? So let's talk about that. They had a data warehouse built in a very traditional sense. And what I mean is they had an integrated data model, they had a semantic layer, and then BI tools sitting on top of that. Well, the problem was that there was a lot of business knowledge that went into understanding and interpreting the data to get it from operational to corporate reporting, and that didn't exist in the data, it didn't exist in the warehouse, and they tried it and attempted to build that into the semantic layer and the BI tools. But the problem was as the complexity and the nuance of the data grew, so did the cost and time to execute the reports, which is how they got to the point to where reports were taking a very long time to run. So as a result, what the business, of course the business, they've got a job to do. And what happened is they would start extracting data out of the warehouse, they would put it in Excel, they would put it in Access or other data mart tools to really apply their knowledge onto the data to get it from operational to corporate reporting. Well, ultimately the challenge with doing that is now you've applied a lot of knowledge to this data that no longer exists in the warehouse. And so when that happens, how do you leverage it further? So ultimately what our project was, Project Solomon, was about identifying and capturing this business knowledge and building it into the data. So the first principle, the fundamental principle that we applied to the project was that the warehouse had to be built for consumption, was really the driving principle. And what I mean by that is that it had to be simple, had to be fast, and it had to be trustworthy when you access the data. And if you access the data and that's the case, the business is more likely to leverage the data as it stands. So first, what I mean by that ultimately is that we have to simplify the complexity of the data. And the way we did that is we built new data structures on top of the integrated data model where we could then do things like validate its accuracy and its trustworthiness. And if and when we identified there were things that were incorrect in the data, we could build tools to actually correct that data to ensure that it is accurate, to ultimately ensure that the business knowledge exists and is built inside of the data warehouse. So, and as a result of doing all that, the warehouse we built is pretty fast, very fast. Over 90% of the reports in the warehouse coming from Project Solomon are returned in less than 30 seconds. And I think it's like 97% less than a minute. So very fast. The average, I think average overall is like 12 seconds. So it's very fast and very consistent in terms of access. And what that has allowed the business to do is really start asking a lot of questions of the data and really work with the data kind of continually, right? So that was one aspect. And the other aspect, of course, is that as the business users are working with the data, we wanted to make sure that they retain control of the data itself. And so we built a number of, what I call apps that allow the business users, for various project functions, various business processes, to be able to look at that data, work with the data, and one, control how it's built, but then two, also when they identify that there are issues in the data, they can actually correct the data directly in the warehouse. And what that really allows for is the elimination of the need to build these data marts and to leverage Excel, Access, and all these other tools, ensure that everything remains inside the warehouse. And then, of course, by doing that, then they can start building things on top of that data. And again, right, really ultimately building the knowledge into the data and into the warehouse. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what I like to think of as the analytical foundation. And this is built on top of the integrated data warehouse. And ultimately, what we're doing here in this case, this is what we call like the actuals. This is all of the events that occur within the Fruit of the Loom business. So all the orders, the invoices, cancellations, shipments, all the different events. One of the things we do as well is we take all this transactional data and we compare it to their general ledger and ensure that there's a complete lineage and a complete tie between transactional and operational. And what that allows the business to do is do that corporate reporting in the warehouse from that transactional level data and ensure that it is correct. Beyond that, what we also do is we've defined a set of common attributes within this data set. The way I like to think about it is it's really like a common language of the Fruit of the Loom business, right? So it's how they think about the data, it's how they communicate. So it has things like customer, item, it has all the transactional level detail, everything that is relevant. One of the other things that has is the chart of accounts. And what that allows the Fruit of the Loom business to do is really tie, again, the transactional data all the way up to the general ledger and ensure it ties completely. And it actually matches to the penny, so they can do corporate level reporting out of this environment, but then they can also drill down and do like item level P&Ls, customer level P&Ls, and really understand the business at a very granular level. In addition to the attributes in this common language, we've also defined all of the business metrics in the data in the warehouse. So things like revenue, cost, margin, and all of the various components of that are defined in the warehouse, in the data. Again, business knowledge being defined in the warehouse and the data. That's something that was very important. And then the other thing that is really unique, I think, and of value to this process was the fact that because this data is built above that integrated data model, as we built these apps into the data, those apps can actually work with and manipulate that data on this higher level. So you still have that source, traceability between source systems to the integrated data model, but then it allows you to manipulate the data above that to ensure that it, again, remains accurate and remains trustworthy. And of course, what that allows is that it eliminates the need to put stuff in Excel and have data marks, right? It allows all of that knowledge to remain inside the data warehouse. So that was actuals. The next process we have is called forecast or forecast dollarization. So what happens with this process is that every month they generate a forecast 18 to 24 months ahead. That forecast, when it comes in, is a volume forecast. So they have quantities of what is going to be shipped, but they don't have all the financial metrics associated with that. So what we did here, again, above the warehouse, we enriched this data with all of that financial information, the revenue, the cost, the margin, all of those components. In addition to that, one of the things we did was the chart of accounts, that financial language that is required for the corporate reporting, we built that into this data as well. And what that allows for, not only, again, common language between these data sets, but then it allows for things like connecting up very easily what's actually occurred with the actuals plus what is projected to occur with the forecast to really provide a robust full year view of the business at a very granular level all the way up to the corporate level. Again, same metrics here, so same language, same definitions. And then also within the forecast, we build a number of apps as well that allows the business users to, again, retain control and manage the data. So what I'll go through now is just a couple examples of some of the apps that were built. We have about 15 or 20 different apps, somewhere in that neighborhood, across all of these different processes. This one, it's kind of interesting because what it allows for is, so here's the example. An order occurs or an invoice occurs within their ERP system, and let's say it's classified incorrectly. Maybe it's a closeout order that gets classified as a regular order. So what the Fruit of the Loom business does based upon their chart of accounts, they segment that differently because that's a different margin structure. right? So if that data remains at the regular business with that lower margin, all of a sudden now profitability, will look different, right? And you may make incorrect business decisions. So given that scenario, you really kind of have a couple options. You can either, one, do nothing except the fact that it's wrong, right? Two, you can pull the data out of the warehouse and manipulate it again in the data mart. Or three, you can build the tools to actually correct it in the warehouse, correct it in the data. And that's ultimately what we did. And that's what this app allows the business to do to ensure that the data is correct. And just one other point on this is that when that happens prior to Project Solomon, they would make the journal entries to say, hey, these things are occurring, but they wouldn't actually fix the detailed data. So then there was a disconnect between detailed data and then the general ledger. And what this allows us to do is really create the connection between, again, operational to corporate reporting. So that's one example. The next example is around the forecast dollarization. What this app, so not all apps here, first of all, have to be very complex. In this case, it's very simple. One point to make is all these apps are using open source technologies. But what this app allows the business to do within the forecast dollarization process is really define how we're going to do the dollarization, what pricing strategies would be associated with each forecast account. That allows, again, the business to really control the process and then control, again, how the data gets built. The last one is around what we call LOCOM or SMI. LOCOM stands for lower cost to market. It's an inventory valuation process where the business looks at current inventory positions and then looks at future orders and future forecasts to say, okay, do we have excess inventory? And when that's the case, typically what happens is that the inventory will likely be sold at a lower cost, therefore a different margin, right? And so if they're able to identify ahead of time that these things are occurring, they can, through this app, allows the business to go in there, edit, and manipulate the data to control and very proactively manage the data. So those are just a couple examples of the app. Now what I'm going to talk about is these layers, right? So I talked about in a couple cases these detail layers. So we have actuals, we have forecasts, we have inventory, POS, there's shipments, there's a number of these things. Beyond that, we have what we call the summary layers. And these summary layers, what they do, it's less about aggregating the data and it's really about making new connections within the data. So we have this common language between these data sets, and what we start doing in these summaries layers is really connecting the data to be able to do things like look at the full year P&L and then create metrics of what's happened this year versus what happened last year versus what we expected in the budget versus the forecast. Create all of that in one simple data set, again, simple data set, right, that allows the business to really work with this data. And then lastly, what we do is we actually build another data set on top of the summary, and this is what we call like a metric summary or a P&L summary. And what this does is really a very simple process on top of the one that we already have, but what it does is starts picking the metrics and really putting them in a different format that ultimately allows the business to do things like generate P&Ls at a customer and item level in a very simple manner, again, either at a very detailed level or at the corporate level. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to turn it back over to Terry, where he's going to talk a little bit about some of the benefits.
So what do we get out of that? You can see before there some of the concerns that we had. Looking now, we don't have data that's not integrated. It's all integrated together. It is analytically friendly, interactive, includes all business attributes and metrics as we talked about. And when I say interactive, it allows them to drill in. So Brian talked about 12 seconds. A lot of the queries run in a lot less than that. So it allows users to see something and, oh, let's drill in further. Let's look at a different way. And since it's fast, it is what I call analytically friendly. And now it's much more than just a data repository. In the past, it was just mainly a repository for folks to extract data out to do more with it. So now there's no need to do that. I'm not saying people still don't do that once in a while. It's hard to break old habits sometimes, but we're making a lot of inroads there. And it's really about getting information when you need it. It's not it's less about having a report show up every morning. It's more about going to the app when you need information. It's there when you need it versus just always being delivered to you. The next thing was closing the gaps. So I was talking about those processes, process 1, 3 to 4 weeks, process 2. On the right there is what those processes are. So customer product P&Ls are automated, self-service now. In the past, the business sales and marketing would go to finance to say, can you run me a P&L? And they would, and 2 or 3 weeks later, they'd come back with the answer. Now it's interactive. They can run their own P&Ls at whatever level they want to. Since it all ties out financially, finance is happy because everything adds up. And so in the business, it's much more. So now where they were maybe they wouldn't go to finance sometimes, they know they're going to take 2 to 3 weeks. Now they can get it whatever they want. The next process is the forecast dollarization. That took 2 weeks every month to do. So you come up with a new volume forecast, and 2 weeks later, you know what impact that had on your margin. And now every day they see it. So they can see immediately when the forecast changes, because we got a working forecast that they can kind of build towards we call it a forecast of record. So you can see every day. When we raise this one or lower that one, you can see the dollar impact immediately. And the last one's that low-com process that 3 weeks, once a quarter. Not only did we automate that, they're now running it monthly. So now they're able to react quicker. You know, before the process took so long that they could only do it once a quarter. Now it happens every month. So here, this last slide is a testimonial from our key business partner. Craig is the Senior Vice President of Financial Planning and Analysis. You can see what he says. You know, it's freed up his folks to basically do what they're hired to do. They're analysts. They're not data gatherers and mungers and that sort of same old thing that everybody says, 80-20 rule. And that's what he's really saying here. And it's not really a downside, you know, that when you succeed, you're asked to do more. So they're not happy. They've got 5, 10, 8 more things they want us to do. So we're going to make our way around the organization. We've got finance, that's the operational recording finance is pretty happy. Forecasting we're working on now. We didn't talk about, we did the forecast dollarization. There's much more that we're doing in the forecast area. Then we're going to go on to the supply chain, manufacturing, planning, in this work our way through the whole organization and transform every department the same way. So that's it. I mentioned we've got some stuff up here that I don't want to take back with me. So hopefully you guys got a question, and even if you don't, you can come up and I got some stuff for women, I got some stuff for men, and even I got some kid stuff in there.
And, thanks, Terry and Ryan, for the great presentation. Let's give applause for that.
So who wants some? This.
What kind of like audit trail do you have in place?
Okay.
What kind of audit trail do you have in place? I mean, do you have people modifying data in your data warehouse? Is that an issue at all? Do you have like change data capture or something to keep track of those changes that are made?
We do, but we're not really changing the data. As Ryan mentioned, you know, that base layer is not changing. So that is our data warehouse. We're allowing them to make changes in that layer above, which is what they were doing outside the system before. And we do have logs that monitor. We can go back and see who changed it when and all that. So we do, but they're not changing the transactional data. And the other thing we're doing, we have this process where we reconcile to the general ledger, and even when we do that, we really don't change the data. We create additional entries, offset entries, so we can always go back to that base data that we had. So if they don't want to see the adjustments, they can query without. So we built it that way, so we do have that trail throughout everything we do. We don't change one piece of data anywhere. We add additional data. Oh, come on up here and get something.
Very good presentation, thank you. I got 2 questions. The first one is, do you maintain any data integrity between the integration layer and the business area? If you do, how do you maintain the data integrity?
this one work?
It doesn't actually.
It doesn't
Okay,
work.
and I'm gonna put in my second question.
You only
because
get
I want
one
two
thing, though.
T-shirts. Just kidding. The second question is, do you normalize the structures in the business area since it sits on top of the integration layer?
I'll answer that the way I normally do. So we are building processes to compare back to our source systems. What we do have is our source systems provide us APIs, queries, if you will, that says, here's what you should have in your data warehouse. And so we run that to see if we match. So yes, what we do on our integration layer is we really don't change the data. We have the data brought over from the source system in the exact same format that it is in the source system. That way we can go back, if we want to add an attribute, we can go back and get it out of what, we don't have to go back to the source system to get it. So what we're doing though is we build it up into, so we have our source layer, which is the exact picture in the source system, then we have the base layer. So the integrated layer is the source layer, and we are validating that both of those match back to the source system. So as we bring it with ETL into our base layer, we do transform it a bit, but then we compare that back to the source system to make sure that, you know, various metrics still add up. And the other question was the normalization. Well, as Ryan said, we really build this for end user consumption. So I don't know if we normalize it or not, but we put it in a format that the business needs. I mean, we don't talk about star schemas and that. We say, what do we need to do to satisfy the business need? I know that some of my members of my team, they got a little bit, you know, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about what the business needs to run the business, and I don't care if it's a star, a banana, or what it is. Come on up and get something, please.
Thank you so much, and this has been an excellent presentation so far in this conference I have attended. So I do have a question. So sometimes this is actually an excellent idea, and we are kind of following the same pattern, but sometimes we end up in an issue like the data layer itself is like wrong, or we got like wrong data somehow in the database, and we end up correcting our presentation layer or the semantic layer, and later on we figure out that it's on the data layer and not on the presentation layer. So did you ever get into that kind of issue or situation? What did you do?
I'll answer. I mean, that happens frequently, right? I mean, with data, you know, data just coming in sometimes is wrong, right? And what we always try to do as much as possible is identify really the root cause of that issue, and then resolve it there, right? So if there's a data issue, because typically what happens is if you find one thing wrong, it's usually pervasive, right? You know, in a lot of other instances, right? So if we can identify what that root cause was, we fix that, and then really push it back up through all of the other layers. So that's generally the process. Now sometimes maybe that can't happen. In that case, then we have those apps that allow the business to go in there and make those corrections on top, you know, in those analytical detail layers. So but typically it's you know, the lowest level possible is the way to go. Because one of the things we always want to be able to do is rebuild these upper layers of data based upon, and that's really one of, you know, a core principle that has to happen, right? So we have to be able to rebuild things, you know, whether as things change or when we identify some of those issues.
We're doing something similar to this with our integrated data warehouse. But one of the areas that we can't seem to get automated is our reference data management. Do you use a outside product for that, or do you do it in-house, or how do you manage that? Or do you allow the data team to make those updates themselves?
It's a mix. So some of the apps that we built allow the business users to manage that reference data. But then also, like for example, on the item level, they have a separate application that they use to manage all of that reference data all of the attributes associated with it. So it's really a mix depending upon whether an application already existed versus one that didn't, depending upon what the specific instance was.
From a storage standpoint, do you have any issues? Because you might, I'll say, store some historical data in your warehouse, right? And when building the business side, those views that you just generated, you must have the same historical information as well. So you must have, well, I'm assuming so, right? A high level of redundancy in terms of data. Is that right, or I just missed something?
Say that last part again. High level of.
You must have a very high level of data redundancy between your warehouse and the layer that you just created for the business, right?
Yes, and I would say absolutely we do. But I guess the way I think about it, given consumption really was primary goal number one, then it's sort of an acceptable thing, to have, really some of that redundancy, right? And then over time, one of the things that we'll do as the data continues to grow, we can, some of that older data, right, we can, migrate off into, whether that's an archive platform or whatever the case might be. But that's, definitely some of that occurs.
That's not virtual, right? It's just persistent data.
It's yes, the data is persistent, it's not virtual, because one of the things we wanted to make sure of is that if we just build all of that logic and views and in the semantic layer, then all of a sudden when you start asking questions, you have to process all of that at that time. And then you don't get consistent 10-second response when you do that, right? Especially as complexity grows, as the business evolves, right? Fruit of the Loom has, 10 plus 15 brands? So there's a lot of variability in the brands and the different lines of businesses. And if all of that was built into just views, and then you try to access that through reports, it's going to take a long time to run. So we really wanted to, we understood that that's a nature of business, right? And as a result of that is really why we wanted to build this as to new data layers, and really not only to solve that, but then also enrich the data as well.
There's one online question. How frequently are you pulling data from the ERP systems?
We're currently doing once a day, just because that's what the current need is. We also allow, using MicroStrategy, we can tap into Oracle and give them real-time reporting if they need that. But we're really thinking about more analysis than operational reporting here, so it's once a day right now. Now we have other things that could come in more often that are not really just the ERP. And I might add that we've got these different apps we build. Now we're starting to build additional ones. Spalding is one of our brands, and NBA is, we have a contract with them, and we have to calculate royalties for them. And we're building that app right now as a separate app that is built on the foundation we've already got. So we're going to keep going and going in every new thing. And now that one we're able to do, with Ryan's guidance, but we're really doing that ourselves. So that's the point. We're letting Ryan tackle the big things, the next big thing, and then we're working on the other things around it. So he's really paving the way. And I'd say that to further answer your question, we'd rather spend the time in processing at night and make the reports responsive and make our views, semantic views, simple, than trying to bring it all together and have these real complex views to try to do it that we know are going to be slow. So we're paying the price in the night in our process to be able to save that time during the day.
Well, and one other point I'd add to that is that by doing that, it allows really the proliferation of the data throughout the entire organization in a very cost-effective manner, right? If it takes 10 seconds, 100 CPU seconds, whatever, to run one of these reports, you can really put that across the entire organization, right, without a huge investment. Whereas if it takes 100 times that, right, which is still maybe 5 minutes or 2 minutes, then it becomes significantly more costly to do that. So either that, or you have to start building things in other tools, right? Create cubes and other things, right, to get it. And again, so now you're doing things outside of the warehouse that you can no longer leverage in the warehouse. So I think that's just another benefit of this approach, is that it makes consumption of the data very cheap, and then there, as a result of that, everybody can access it.
For a couple behind us. We got some more stuff up here.
All right, I'll take one. That was my online question.
Oh, I see. There you go.